a second night in a row, the NBA playoffs will be shut down as athletes across the sports world stand in solidarity against racial injustice.
Keep the political commentary to yourself, or as someone once said, shut up and dribble.
Before anthem protests were trending, before social media debates, before the NBA publicly supported player activism, there was one player who stood alone, and it may have cost him everything. His name? Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. Before he was Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, he was Chris Jackson, and he was different. Chris was born on March 9th, 1969, in Gulfport, Mississippi, to a single mother, Christian household, and extreme poverty. Raised with two brothers in a community surrounded by drugs, prostitution, and violence, Jackson's family sometimes resorted to eating sugar water or syrup sandwiches for their only meals of the day. Chris's mother worked in a cafeteria to support them, but only had an 8th grade education. She didn't have the tools to give Chris everything he needed educationally, and because of this, he was labeled as slow. He was shy, missed the 4th grade, and was placed in special education classes. Chris didn't know his father. In fact, out of him and his two brothers, he was the only one that didn't know his father. He began to find solace in basketball, developing a relentless work ethic to achieve perfection. He didn't just want to become the greatest basketball player of all time, he needed to become the greatest basketball player of all time. But there was something else about Chris that just made him different. From a young age, he struggled with uncontrollable tics, sudden movements, involuntary sounds, things he couldn't even explain. Teachers didn't understand it, classmates didn't either. Some laughed and some avoided him, and for a kid already labeled slow, it only reinforced the perception that he just didn't belong. It wasn't until his senior year of high school that he was diagnosed with Tourette's syndrome. So basketball became therapy, structure, and control for him. Where the classroom felt chaotic, the court felt precise, and Chris became obsessive about that precision. He would repeat the same shot over and over and over again. Hundreds of free throws, thousands of jumpers. If the ball didn't rotate perfectly, he'd start again. If his feet weren't aligned exactly how he wanted, he'd reset. Perfection wasn't a goal. For Chris, it was survival. By the time he reached high school, that obsession started turning into dominance. At Gulfport High School in Mississippi, Chris averaged over 30 points per game. By his senior year, that number climbed to nearly 40 a night. He led the state in scoring. He dropped 50-point games like they were normal. Defenses knew exactly who was shooting, and yet they still couldn't stop him. He wasn't just a volume scorer, he was surgical. His handle was tight, his release was quick, his range stretched beyond what coaches at the time considered good shots, and at the free throw line, he was automatic. By the end of his high school career, he had scored over 3,000 points. But what made coaches pay attention wasn't just the numbers, it was the control, the way he played like someone chasing something bigger than wins. Recruiters started calling, and eventually, one opportunity changed everything. LSU, Louisiana State University, from sugar sandwiches in Gulfport to the SEC. And Chris Jackson was about to show the country that he wasn't slow, but that he was ahead. When Chris Jackson arrived at LSU, he wasn't supposed to be a cultural phenomenon. He was a skinny 6'1" guard from Mississippi, but within weeks, he became must-watch television. As a freshman, he averaged over 30 points per game. Not in high school, but at a Power 5 Division I school. Night after night, he was pulling up from deep, attacking bigger defenders, gliding into mid-range jumpers. And he didn't just score, he overwhelmed. He dropped 53 in the game, then 55. Defenders face guarded him full court, but the double teams didn't matter. The arena would buzz the second he crossed half court, and the free throws, automatic. He shot over 85% from the line in college, the product of thousands of lonely reps in Gulfport. The NBA was knocking at his door, and Chris wasn't finna let this opportunity pass him. On draft night in 1990, David Stern called Derek Coleman's name first overall to the New Jersey Nets, followed by Gary Payton's name as he placed the Seattle Supersonics hat on his head. With the third overall pick, the Denver Nuggets would need to find a new franchise cornerstone after letting 36-year-old Hall of Fame veteran Alex English walk in free agency to the Dallas Mavericks.
With the third pick in the 1990 NBA Draft, the Denver Nuggets select Chris Jackson from LSU.
So the first early entry player to be selected.
I mean, when you think about it, who was the better option to take over the throne other than the sophomore sensation who averaged 30 points per game his freshman year at LSU? Who was the All-American his freshman year and sophomore year, who averaged 28 points per game with Shaq as his teammate his sophomore year? There was no better fit other than Chris Jackson. Chris Jackson entered the NBA as a scorer, and early on, he proved that he belonged. With the Denver Nuggets, he averaged double figures almost immediately, averaging 14 points per game in his rookie season as a sixth man off the bench, and even being named to the 1990-91 All-Rookie team. But amongst all this success, Chris began feeling unfulfilled by his Baptist faith that he's been practicing since he was a child, and he started to experience personal insecurities. Chris had always began searching for structure, for identity, for understanding, so he began studying Islam. He read the Quran and the autobiography of Malcolm X, and the more he learned, the more he began to resonate with his observations. He was driven by a search for a purpose and spiritual connection, and in 1991, he converted from Christianity to Islam. Chris only averaged 10 points per game in his second year in the league, and it wouldn't be until 1993 and his third season in the league that he would change his name from Chris Jackson to Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. Mahmoud meaning praised, and Abdul-Rauf meaning servant of the most merciful. It wasn't a publicity move. It wasn't for attention. It was conviction. And conviction changes a man. Mahmoud became possessed. He averaged 19 points per game in the 1993 season, started all 81 games he played in, shot 45% from the field and 35% from the three. He was pulling up from the three in an era that didn't value the three-pointer. He shot over 35% from deep in a decade where teams barely attempted them. He went from an 87% free throw shooter in his second year to a 94% free throw shooter now. Rauf would be named the 1992-1993 NBA's most improved player. For the next couple seasons, Mahmoud would continue to get to his bag offensively, looking like a player ahead of his time, staying around the 16 to 19 point per game mark. His identity was no longer just basketball, it was belief. And in America, in the 1990s, that mattered. He was entering his prime, his game was peaking, his confidence was solidifying, but there was one thing that made Mahmoud stick out like a sore thumb to a lot of, let's just say, unhappy viewers. In March of 1996, Mahmoud decided to stop standing for the national anthem before games, often staying in the locker room or stretching on the court, arguing that kneeling or standing contradicted his Islamic beliefs. He viewed the American flag as a symbol of tyranny and oppression. His protest was rooted in his Muslim faith and his views on social injustice, which led to media backlash. As a consequence, the NBA suspended him for one game without pay for violating league rules that required players to stand during the national anthem. This is when he really boiled the blood of spectators.
It is quite another to have made the outrageous political statements that he has.
He reached a compromise. He would be present during the anthem, but he was going to stand and pray with his head down. And that's exactly what he did. And inside the league, something shifted. Officially, nothing dramatic happened. He wasn't fined again, wasn't publicly disciplined beyond the suspension, but quietly, his role began to shrink. In the 1995-96 season, before the controversy, Mahmoud was averaging nearly 19 points per game. He was one of the Nuggets' primary scorers. After the backlash, his minutes dipped, his usage declined, and in 1996, just months after the anthem controversy, Denver traded him to the Sacramento Kings. No major injury, no major decline, just moved. So what really happened? Was Mahmoud blackballed? A 29-year-old elite shooter in his prime, out of the league? And here's the part that lingers. If Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf played today, in a pace and space era, in a league that encourages pull-up threes, in a league that publicly supports social activism, does his career look different? Does he average 25 instead of 16? Does he get 5 more seasons? Was he simply too early? Too early as a shooter, too early as a protester, and too early as a man willing to stand alone. History remembers champions. It celebrates dynasties, but sometimes the most important stories belong to the players who challenge the system. Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf didn't just shoot ahead of his time, he lived ahead of it. And sometimes, being early cost you everything.